basically, Uganda tourism, the tourism in Uganda relies heavily on natural resources. I, Actually, the fact is 90% of our tourism relies on natural resources. This is our flora and fauna. Meaning that if we are to be able to continue to be in business, our core area should be how do we ensure a sustainable utilization of the natural resources. So basically, we have, those are statistics, we have 10 national game parks, 12 game reserves, we have a reach of cultural heritage, landscape, mountains, and these all form our level of tourism. And over 60% of our revenue comes from the greater tourism. It's that interesting. So where do we come from? In the tourism industry contributes about 1.5 million tourists we received. It contributes about it contributed about 1.6 billion in 2018, up from 1.4 billion in 2017. In terms of the growth of the industry in the last 10 years, the industry has more than doubled from 540 million to 1.6 billion in terms of revenue, meaning that if you are any strategic investor, this is the area where you would put your money, where we have triple growth. Currently, in terms of social inclusion and employment, if we want to fight unemployment in Uganda, tourism is where we should put our money. We employ about 6.7% of the total employment in Uganda, and we contribute about 7.7 to the GDP. These are statistics from Ministry of Tourism. Basically, that is mainly about the statistics in Uganda, meaning that if the Ugandan government is very strategic, like it is, as having mainstream tourism as a key sector, if we want to continuously protect our environment, we need to put our money in the tourism industry. But what is happening? In terms of natural resources, in the last 30 years, Uganda has reduced in terms of forest cover from 24% of forest cover to 9%. Meaning, in simple calculation, over 15% of the forest cover has been lost in the 30 years. Meaning, if we don't tread carefully, we are about to hit a deadlock in terms of our tourism industry. And this is where the discussion of how does ecotourism, how does responsible tourism come. So basically, picking on from there, like I had said, our tourism industry, our natural resources include the minerals, the oil and gas, the water, the forest, the mountains. And the biggest challenge we have is that the other resources, like oil and gas, whereas they have a very also good contribution to the economy, they are predatory in nature to tourism. Now this is where we have a catch-22 situation. Yes, we want the oil and gas, but how do we ensure that we exploit it without depleting or destroying our ecosystems? How do we ensure that we have a balance between the oil and our tourism and our natural resources? Now, ecotourism is basically, people think it's a form of tourism, but ecotourism simply refers to responsible travel to natural areas that conserve the environment and improve the well-being of the local people. Now here, we are looking at business practices. In ecotourism, you must ensure the three things. One is social inclusion of the communities where you are. Two is the environmental protection. And three, the economic growth. The economy, how does the money in the economy, first of all, ensure those three things? And those three things largely are the ones which point at environment sustainability. Now, in terms of practices, the biggest question here is how do the practitioners, the government, how are we ensuring proper utilization of our water resources? How do we ensure proper utilization of our energy? How do we mainstream our suppliers in the value chain? How do we involve our communities? Because if the communities are not involved, then ecotourism cannot exist. Because those communities will be the first to destroy the environment, either for firewood, but if they have an alternative source of income, then they will not destroy those environments. Meaning that inclusion of the communities in our business approaches, both from government and private sector, is very, very important. How do they ensure their livelihood? As we practice our businesses in tourism, ecotourism emphasizes that we need to make sure that the livelihoods of the community is involved and the resources like water, energy are effectively utilized. Then ecotourism has basic principles, and these principles include minimization. How do we minimize the impact of the tourism activities on the nature attraction? Now in Uganda, we do not encourage mass tourism. We look at sustainable tourism, meaning that some destinations or some areas, we do, for example in the Goria area, we have a limited carrying capacity. That means we do not, the policies that the government puts in place should ensure that we do not deplete that resource by encouraging mass travel. So minimization of the impacts of the tourism activities in natural attractions is very important, and this is achieved through legislations, recognizing and building, recognize and build awareness about local conservation values and their importance to society, meaning that in areas where we travel, it is important that the cultural values of those people, the local people themselves, in their natural setting, how do we encourage them to be able to use their values to do the conservation? Then we provide direct benefits and empowerment. I talk about this in terms of employment. The communities will only understand if they see value. And the only way they can see value is through either getting direct employment or a direct benefit out of those resources in their areas. So ecotourism emphasizes this, and respect to their cultural values. Then respect local people in their customs and culture is also a principle in ecotourism. Support sustainable development of the eco-economy through direct involvement and participation in decision making. Sometimes we sit, because we believe those local communities may not have the knowledge, we sit and decide for them. Yet, if we sat with those people and understood their nascent or cultural orientation, would be able to develop better decisions in terms of protecting those environments and benefiting them than actually sitting somewhere and deciding for those people. So in terms of ecotourism, the participation of the local communities is highly involved, is highly recommended, especially in terms of protecting those areas and benefiting them. In Uganda, we can be able to look at the status and position. One, we have the legislations, NEMA. It exists, very good policy. We have the Wildlife Act, a very good policy. The regulations are there. What's the impediment? Implementation. The implementation of these policies has failed to realize actually what the intended purpose is for, and that is where my colleague will come in to tell us how far. Then also the private business tourism, the business players in the industry, how quick are they embracing the sustainable practices? When we're talking about sustainable practices, we're looking at putting in place, for example, in terms of energy usage, can we look at alternative sources of energy usage that are available and green? When we're talking about waste, can we practice the 3 R's? The recycle, the reduce, and reuse. Most of the waste produced in most of our destinations, the hotels, almost 80% is biodegradable, but it ends up in the landfills. How do we ensure that we are encouraging practices in our places that are ensuring this kind of sustainability in terms of... I was very happy this morning, and I want to credit the organizers of this conference. If all of us in the morning were to use water bottles, plastic water bottles, by the end of the day, we would have generated more than 1,500 empty water bottles. But I am happy that for the first time I have seen conference organizers insisting on sustainable usage. One big bottle of water serves close to 50 people. If those 50 people had bottles, you'd have 50 empty bottles. That means you have more waste, more expense, but you realize we had about 5 water bottles, and they still exist. And we can use this. One of the things I want to encourage is that as consumers, because as conference organizers, you're consumers, you can drive the demand, you can drive the need to change practices of business entities by insisting on some of these simple and easy ways of reducing waste in these places. Because it's business as usual in these hotels, they will easily go for the quickest thing, throw water bottles everywhere. Yet, if actually they used the model you're using today, they will even cut down on their expense. Because that big can you saw is 8,000 shillings. 8,000 serving over 50 people. Yet one bottle of water is 1,000 shillings. So 50,000 versus 8,000. Where is the mathematics? So basically, those are what I would say, that we need to work hard to see that the private businesses embrace the sustainable practices, then change in consumer behavior. We as the consumers, we need to change and demand the sustainable practices. So roles of the different actors, government, in terms of policy, regulation, and guidelines. The development partners, we need to work on some of these things and make sure that we insist. For example, today, EU, I am sure, behind the curtains must have insisted. And I'm sure if another conference also comes and insists, the proprietors here will understand that now the drive is towards sustainable consumption. And they will invest. And you know, it is interesting, these water cans can be supplied, the dispensers can be supplied by the manufacturer free of charge. And the manufacturer will reduce on his number of bottles he's churning out. Eventually, there's a trickle-down effect. One of the things that we need to do is civil societies need to be brought on board, associations, academia. Now here, where academia becomes very important, is that if we could have this kind of a practice where we're teaching our children from the word go, that it is important to, for example, for everything you use, if we're able to tell them that this is how you can be able to conserve, waste management, this is what you need to do. You grow up and it becomes part of you. So basically, it is important. It inculcates discipline. Then business entities at farm level, training is very important. Currently, we are running a program with the hotels, the tour operators. There is what we call the tourism excellence program to teach the tour operators on how they can design what we call green packages. Then the hotels on how they can manage waste, how they can manage energy. And basically now we want to start a campaign with the consumers. Those were the basics. I would want to say that one of the greatest Kenyans, thinkers in environment, said, it's the little things that the citizens do, that's what makes the difference. My little thing is planting the trees. Now, for you, what is your little thing as a business practitioner, as government, as those people who would want to see the environment as, because our forest cover is reducing, how do we increase our forest cover? How do we reduce our waste? How do we manage our tourism sustainably? Thank you very much. Those were my quick words. I will hand over to Jalia.
Thank you, Richard Kawere. As I indicated earlier, we have someone from the Ministry of Wildlife, Tourism and Antiquities, Mr. Liaz Vivian, and then we have Mr. Amos Wekesa from a private private practice, CEO and founder, Great Lakes Safaris. They'll give us the different perspectives. Mr. Vivian will tell us about the role of government, regulation, governance to promote ecotourism. And Mr. Wekesa will tell us about the opportunities and challenges of ecotourism in Uganda. We have 5 minutes, and you're very welcome. Mr. Diaz. Be okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm cognizant of the time. We are very, very late, and dinner is almost served, so permit me to try and be as summarized as possible in this discussion. Good enough, Richard has elaborated or set the pace of the discussion very well, and you all know ecotourism is really about responsible tourism and sustainable tourism, and therefore that should be the driving force. The demand for ecotourism is actually growing from the effects we are seeing with the environment. We are all cognizant of what is happening in the environment currently, the weather changes, the floods, the heat waves, and so on and so forth. People are now looking for eco-friendly destinations. They are demanding this. And as a result, the market is also responding by giving eco-friendly destinations. The problem of deforestation, heat waves, flooding, and so on and so forth is causing or amplifying the need for this. In Uganda, we could say we are an eco-tourism destination by default. But of course, when you talk about responsible travel, and Richard did elaborate very well, going to places, learning more about the need to conserve these environments, contributing to society, and leaving the environment better than you actually left it, is a challenge that many people have not adequately responded to. There are a number of success stories we do have, and I believe my friend Amos will be elaborating on some of them, but in our national parks, we have cases within the Bwindi. Those of you familiar with Bwindi, there are successful stories there, where even investment in collaboration with the communities has been quite successful. The Clouds Lodge, those of you who have heard of it, is a collaboration of the community and the conservation partners, and the proceeds actually go into helping these communities. Those of you who have been to the Kidepo National Park, normally there is a package taking you to the Manyatas and seeing the traditional ways of life of the Karamajong. The little resources that you do take to supplement these communities, thanking them with 1,000 shillings, does a lot in changing their livelihoods. And some of you have been there, have seen these changes that go on. Those of you who have been to Queen Elizabeth National Park, you've been to the Salt Lakes, and seen how the traditional ways of mining salt, but also the little contribution that you leave there, actually changes the whole scenario. I want to bring you closer to Kampala. You've been probably to Ndere Center and partaked the cultural entertainment that is at Ndere Center. Many of the performers there, you must know, are orphans and are people who either are unable to undertake education supported by their parents, but Mr. Ranjesi has taken them on. They do perform, and he provides a good education for them. These are some of the critical examples we can come up with in this ecotourism debate. And what is important is involvement, is support, and ecological take. There are challenges I may talk about, and I believe Richard elaborated some of these challenges. Let me pick on just a few to accentuate this issue. Ecotourism, one of the problems we have is it's a very broad concept and therefore prone to abuse and ambiguity. Many people claim to be an eco partner or an ecotourism destination when indeed they are not, or they are just addressing a small tiny bit of the whole value chain. And I think it is very important that we address the issue of green stamping. You know, you're a tourist who has a nice car, but people are throwing away bottles in that very car. Or you're taking people to destinations that are not very eco-friendly, but because you have a green car and you claim you are an eco-tourist partner. So we need to address the whole value chain. We need to be able to assess how green your enterprise is and have levels of this assessment. And I think that is very important in moving very forward. It's also important to note that ecotourism best manifests in very pristine environments, fragile environments, and therefore it is very expensive to set up an ecotourism destination. It doesn't benefit from the economies of scale, where you put up 200 rooms and able to pull down the price and so on and so forth. You find that if you put up a lodge in a mountainous area, in a protected area, the costs are a little bit higher, and therefore government needs to support, incentivize this effort in order for you to survive as an ecotourism destination. But having said that, there is this whole problem of greenwashing, and I've already talked about it, as many enterprises pretend to be eco destinations simply because they do something that is a bit green. And this is where the issue of regulation comes in, to ensure that people actually do not fleece the clients. We've been to some of these places where clients are very annoyed, having been told that we're going to an eco destination, and when they reach there, really they are being short-changed. Government needs to zone out some of these places, especially supporting those who are investing in eco practices and destinations. You wouldn't like to set up this very nice lodge and next to you somebody is doing something quite different, has a portion meal, and there's a lot of noise in that area. So zoning becomes one of those critical things that we need to look at. I did talk about certification, but more importantly also the awareness of the public. Richard did elucidate about that. You know, if the public is not very conscious about what they are demanding, then we may not go a very long way. And of course also instilling the domestic tourism market as well. Much of this eco-tourism demand is foreign, but we don't have a lot of domestics pushing for ecotourism products. So that is a challenge that we need to address. From a government point of view, we'll do more in areas of research and planning to ensure that we provide credible data, guide policy development, and also the investors on where to put. But also investing in security and safety. As we said, many of the ecotourism destinations are in very fragile ecosystems, and you wouldn't like to be caught up in a mountainous area or in a forested area in an insecure situation. You all recall what happened in Buindi in 1999 or something. It really affected us. It affected us for over 10 years. And we're in the Virunga on the Congo side, maybe around November, and a week later, a few people were killed in the Virunga mountains, and the lodges are closed. Therefore, all the communities are disaffected. They have no income for all that period of time. So security, investment in security and safety will be very important. Developing the regulations and guidelines. Many of the eco certifications are voluntary, and we are now mainstreaming them into the government regulation so that we help in advancing ecotourism. We are also working hard on infrastructure development, promoting access, promoting utility, and of course, in the sessions, many people did talk about some of these developments. Marketing and promotion is also very important. Accessing people to the right markets that demand this kind of service, digitizing these markets. You know, the digital revolution has kind of revolutionized or democratized access to the markets. When you're a very small eco-lodge down out there, you may not compete with the big multinational companies. But if you're on Airbnb, the market is open for everyone. You have equal access. So promoting digital services is one of the other areas. We talked about investment support, and I think that is very important. And Richard talked about advancing the green policies through investment support, incentivizing these things. I want to stop there in the interest of time. I hope I've shed a little bit of light in that area. Thank you so much.
And finally, straight away, I call upon Mr. Amos Wekesa to share with us his experience from the field and the person on the ground of what ecotourism means in Uganda, opportunities, challenges. You're most welcome.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm generally a very shy guy, and but I'm going to pick courage and speak to you people. But I'm also aware that we're tired. I've been working since 6 a.m. This whole week, the whole of last week was a very tiring week. Coming up with messages from our own clients about coronavirus, engaging government on how we need to communicate and how we need to deal with the different situations. It's been tiring, and I don't think it's me alone and many of you in the room. I like the quote that Richard put out earlier on. It is the little things that citizens do that what makes the difference. My little thing is planting trees. That's what Kawari put out. Thank you so much for a great presentation. I must say, I also belong in the world of advocacy. I think it's something that I've done that I enjoy doing. And I'm right now the chairman of Presidential Investors Roundtable on Tourism, and I have a very good number in the room that sit with me on the board. You put up your hand, you, the other big man in the island, it's another resort. And I can tell you that one of the things and critical thing that I think we have pushed in this session or this time is to make sure that there's no taxes on home used gas. And we're doing this because the cost of a lot of people use firewood. We're assuming that when the gas becomes cheaper, at the end of the day, we'll see more people going towards gas than cutting down the forest for use as charcoal. Now, that said, Uganda is in many ways a very gifted country, and God blessed it between the grasslands of East Africa, as Kenya and Tanzania, and the tropical rainforest of Congo. And because of that, Uganda has, even just in terms of wildlife, you find West African wildlife, majorly the primates, and you'll also find the East African wildlife, animals like the big five in Uganda as well. Now, you will not find the mountain gorillas in Kenya, you will not find the mountain gorillas in Tanzania. You'll find a few patches of areas where the chimpanzees in Tanzania, Kenya, you don't find them in the wild, and therefore, this is a very gifted country. It's a country where you go to, and every part of the country is a tourism attraction. In fact, there's no place in Uganda that you will go and you not see something very amazing. And that way also matches with the tribes. I always tell people that when you go to Kenya, the Samburus jump, the Maasais jump, the Itesos jump. You come to this country and go across the country, see how the Acholis stamp the ground. You go among the Bagisu, we use the West. You go among the Bachiga. When they hit the ground, you think it's going to give way. You go among the Baganda, you'll be shocked. All the different tribes. So, and almost every different tribe has got its bit of speciality in terms of food, in terms of environment, and in terms of dances, like I can say. Now, these are things that we have not exploited. Uganda's tourism is still at a very, very low stage. I always tell Ugandans that we have not even touched 1% of the tourism potential that we have as a country. And just to know that it is true, you will go out there and you see the second freshwater lake in the world that we own over 40%, completely empty. The islands are empty. Some guy did research and said if Lake Victoria was well utilized by Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, we would make $63 billion a year through tourism and at the same time transport and other activities on the lake. So it's completely unexploited as a country. Now, when you look at all our 10 national parks and 12 game reserves, fairly well distributed across the country. We have less than 3,000 rooms in and out of those national parks combined. And you know that probably by the end of this year, Masai Mara alone in Kenya will be having close to 5,000 rooms. Now, the opportunities in Uganda are massive. But Uganda used to be the #1 tourism destination in East and Central Africa until 1971. Now, the things that changed, tourism and insecurity cannot coexist. So in 1971, the greatest guys when hospitality moved out to Europe, a lot moved across Africa. Many went to Kenya to start up Kenya's tourism. Kenya was nowhere compared to Uganda as far as tourism is concerned. But this was also prehistoric. If you look at airports, in the 1940s or the end of 1940s, Entebbe Airport was the biggest airport in Africa. I know you don't believe that. There were cruises on Lake Victoria, massive. And when British Overseas Airline Corporation, which is now called British Airways, was operating, it used to fly out of London to Cairo, to Entebbe and Johannesburg. And the reason was that it was 4 hours from Entebbe to Cairo, 4 hours from Entebbe to Johannesburg, 1.5 hours to Mombasa, and 1.5 hours to major parts of Congo. So it was very strategic. But also in terms of landing, in terms of takeoff, when you look at the region, the only part of the region that was lower than Entebbe was Dar es Salaam, which is about less than 60 meters high. And when you're taking off on a lower altitude, you use less fuel. But that's not what I'm here to tell you about, just to remind you that Uganda was the destination. The best trained people in East and Central Africa were from Uganda. In fact, they're the ones who started up Kenya's tourism. And until 1975, when the Kenyan president got so angry and said, why are Ugandans dominating our tourism industry? And he set up Utalii in 1975, gave it to one of the top training schools in the world, and gave them 10 years to make sure that enough trainers in Kenya. Now, that said, Uganda is starting to move up, and we're seeing changes. In 2016, Uganda hired 3 PR farms, one in the UK, one in the US, and one in Germany. And also plus the efforts of private sector, we've seen numbers going up. If you look at an example of just the gorilla tourism, it moved from barely 40% to over 80% right now. And of course, Uganda is not like the other two countries that have the mountain gorillas. We have close to 50% of the groups habituated, but then those 50% are close to 50%, about 49, 48, about 19 groups that track per day. You're only allowed 8 people per day. That's an ecotourism thing. Of course, the unfortunate bit that you have to have escorts and all those kind of people, that guides that go along with you. It affects the experience, but it's still very good experience. Now, with the marketing, you can see that Uganda Life Authority in the last 2-3 years has moved from collecting 70 billion shillings from their gates to about 150 billion shillings. It's a very good story. But this is from an investment of about $1.5 million a year. Now, slowly the government of Uganda is accepting and understanding that tourism must exist. Now, quickly just to give you a few examples of things that are happening, I normally give a good example of success stories of Bigodi. How many of us know Bigodi swamps, Mabamba swamps? Bigodi is one of my favorite places. This was rice growing, guys cut down the forest, started growing rice. In 1993, a guy comes and says, guys, can you just allow the forest to regenerate? The forest regenerated. And in 1993, of course, people started ecotourism, where the community was in charge of the whole area. But of course, for any ecotourism project to succeed, the quality of the community is very important, but at the same time, the quality of leadership in that community also matters. So a guy called Tinka took the responsibility of making sure that he does a good job with the community. So they started training S4 livers, train them on the different species of birds. They have over 220 different species of birds. They have about 9 different species of primates, and they have a 3-hour walk. And tourists are paying about $20 to do that. As a company, I run Great Lake Safaris on Uganda lodges, about 4 lodges in Uganda. I've just bought another one in Tanzania. And still growing. I'm hoping to have maybe 6-7 lodges in this country, God willing, with time. But with Great Lake Safaris, we've supported Bigodi swamps for a very long time. We make sure that every program of ours passes through there. And of course, I also own the main lodge in Chibali National Park, Primate Lodge. We have guys who come and dance for the tourists whenever the lodge is full, and these kids pay school fees based on the money they collect from the place. And I believe that these are very good examples. When you look at Bigodi swamps, they actually met the Millennium Goals, and they're collecting over $500 million Ugandan shillings every single year. And the first secondary school in the whole county was looked after by that same swamp. The first nice clinic is actually run by the swamp. The first primary school in the whole community was run by the swamp. If you see the bridges they are making, they're constructing, and now the community understands the value of tourism, and now they've tapped into the bigger tourism. And what's happening is that these kids are trained so well that us, the tour operators, that Uganda Life Authority, in a way, steals them to employ them. Then we also steal them from Uganda Life Authority as tour operators. And now these people go back and start, training other kids, but at the same time bringing value to Bigodi. Now, Bigodi is growing in a very interesting way. The other one I would give is Budongo. I ran Babidi part of Budongo. Budongo is just about 830 square kilometers, has East Africa's biggest mahogany trees, for example, so many species of birds and a lot of reptiles inside there. Before I took over Budongo, it was run by National Forest Authority and another organization, and for 3 years, National Forest Authority had collected $20,000. And as I speak right now, we're giving National Forest Authority $200,000, and I'm telling them, okay, soon we'll be giving $1 million, and I will have made a profit myself. Now, what made a difference? Of course, if you go there, we have a small eco lodge. I'm going to be building another lodge, but we have an eco lodge that all the linen is washed by the community. I spent some money, I gave some money to the community to do beehives. They're starting to make honey from the forest, and these are guys from the community. The only area that I failed because I didn't follow up, I was giving them every season $2,000, $3,000 to buy seedlings to plant food for sale to the lodges that are available in Martin Falls. The reason they failed was partly because of leadership, but the other was they started supplying the bigger market, which is Masindi market, and they forgot that there was a much bigger plan for the lodges available around the national parks. Now, I could talk until cows come home. I think my time is up, isn't it? Now, as a person, of course, this comes from my own background. I started out, I came from abject poverty. By the age of 10, I'd never gone to school. I was brought up by Salvation. I went to nursery school at the age of 10 under Salvation Army. I was in a home of less advantaged kids. About were 48 of us. Thankfully, because I think I was too old, I failed in school, and I started out as a sweeper, earning $10 a month. My last job was $40 a month, and I understood the value of impacting other people and running something that is sensible as a person. So I know that money is important. Money is only important actually if you don't have it. And when you have it, it can be a trouble. It can wake you up in the night to go and dance. It can wake you. It can actually give you a headache. So you have to learn how to to deal with. I want to thank you for listening.
Thank you, Amos. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Vivian. A round of applause for. It's been a very wonderful team, very productive team, and very cooperative team that I've worked with. Ladies and gentlemen, the ball is in your courts. Dinner is served or not yet served, but I think we have a few minutes for some interaction. It would be unfair to have this resource leave without a few moments of interaction. Yes, please, a brief introduction, and please go straight on.
James Lalobo of Heritage Holiday Safaris, and I'm the Product and Services Innovation Director. I'm very pleased about aspects of ecotourism, and also very glad about the short history of success, particularly involving the community, the issue of leadership, the issue of a buy-in by the community, and how it's now taking on. One area of interest, though, is how finance can be made eco-sensitive and eco-responsive. Because in many cases, in order to go eco, you do require technology, which might be a bit expensive, particularly to process waste and to manage it in a circular way. And often, you may require to have your products come out from European Union, for instance, which have got their set standards in terms of processing the primary raw material into the productive material which you'll use. So I just wonder if anybody from the European Union is here, whether they can comment on the linkage between capital and ecosystem and how that can be supported in an environment like Uganda.
Session is not exhaustive. We'll have tomorrow to interact with the colleagues, and again, if we don't have the resources, all the questions or responses, we'll still have an opportunity to get back to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Andrew Sentongo from the private sector. I represent a German company investing in renewables. I myself own a renewable energy company based on off-grid and solar grid connections. My question is to the tourism practitioners, especially the private sector. How has tourism integrated renewable energy, especially to bring the carbon footprint down? Because based on some studies we've done, especially the off-grid lodges, their diesel consumption is quite high. Myself, I've been to some lodges, and the generator runs from morning up to evening, sometimes from evening through late in the night. So my question is, how has tourism sort of integrated the concept of clean energy within their value chain? If not, we have some solutions for you.
I think would be glad to hear some of those solutions straight away. We are all a resource here, by the way. No one has the silver bullet. Maybe. Please do.
Yeah, so we have some interesting products, especially for individual off-takers, and lodges would be a good fit for this, whereby we undertake the investment, for example, in a solar PV plant, as the company I represent, which is called Empower Life. So we would set the system up, invest in it, and then provide the energy needs for the lodge or for the off-taker on a long-term basis. We could structure it as a lease agreement. We could structure it as a PPA, but the buy-in for the off-taker is that they don't have to meet the upfront cost, which is prohibitive for renewables. We undertake that upfront cost. Then if you factor diesel, it becomes more interesting for both of us, because the kilowatt hour produced by diesel is actually quite high. You're looking at $1 plus per kilowatt hour. Kilowatt hour for medium scale industries, umeme, is probably averaging 18 to 21 cents of a dollar, depending on grid or off grid. We can bring that down to the area between 10 and $14 cents per kilowatt hour through the solutions that we have. And that cost can come down without actually the customer putting $1 on the table. So we have such products in our pipeline, and it would be interesting to sort of take tourism as a whole, not only for us to earn money, but also to look at how can tourism be more sustainable within their value chain, especially from the point of diesel, because diesel is a main contributor in carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you. This is an avenue to shop around. Take the names, the numbers, and the contacts today, tomorrow, and going forward. We'll have one question here and one from here.
Mine is a submission. The gentleman of renewable energy. We had a weird experience. We have this lodge. It's based in a national park. So they limited the hours on when the generator should run. So the problem came in, especially from the clients. We're saying, no, we want the generator to run as long as we are at the lodge. So the lodge was fixed in a situation whether should we run the generator or should we stick on our conservation policy. So it's a double-sided blade when it comes to environment and conservation. And I love the idea of working on what we call a case-by-case basis, because Each property is different. Where possible, some will be able to buy in the renewable energy idea. Others will tell you, well, if at all you install solar panels, because of our location, they can't support lighting at a facility. Definitely we have to be forced to go diesel, to have generators. So, that's my submission. That one. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. My name is Martijn Harla. I represent a company called EyeOpenerWorks. As EyeOpenerWorks, we've been leading the process of developing the first open source curriculum for tourism and hospitality skilling in East Africa with contextualized resources that can be used by any accommodation provider to skill youth from surrounding environments and lead them to to provide them with the basic skill set required to start up jobs in these lodges. So anyone interested to hear more about this, please reach out to me after this. My main question actually is not on the skilling side, but I really appreciated Richard's contribution, also mentioning the community engagement. My main question would be around the emissions that are not so much related to the lodges and the hotels, but that come with the transport that is involved in the value chain. And maybe two questions to you, Amos, and maybe also Vivian. One would be about how do you look at solutions that would green the current dominant mode of transport in the tourism sector, which is safari vehicles that run on either petrol or diesel, and how would you look at initiatives that convert those into electrical powered vehicles? I know there's a company in Kenya already doing that, converting Land Cruisers into solar powered vehicles, electricity powered vehicles, but this would require, I think, a bigger investment from several actors coming together to come up with the supporting infrastructure to support such an initiative. And secondly, how do you look at tourism that embraces other modes of transport, such as cycling in a country like Uganda? Do you see potential for that? And if so, what would be needed to make that a success in Uganda?
Thank you very much. Obadiah Lalobo is my name. Lodge operator, Murchison Falls National Park. I would like to agree with the gentleman of renewable energy. At Heritage, we are probably consuming upwards of 20,000 liters of diesel a calendar year. And if you look at the cost of diesel and you put that at $1, forget about servicing the generator. You're talking $20,000. Now, a solar solution that would give us, we run a 40 kVA generator for up to about, it's structured to operate 12 hours. You'd run it between 4 in the morning to about 7 in the morning when the tourists have gone off on the park activities. You may power it for those coming back for lunch. You may also start to power it in the evening when your guests are returning. Now we have solar solutions as well for outdoor lighting, but you find to be entirely eco would come with fundamental shift in so many processes. We are in an area where our water is salty. We cannot, to desalinate our water is equally expensive. We rely on generator power to have instant showers, hot water showers. That may not be achieved through the solar solution. In other words, you can see that for us to make our water soft enough to go through the solar collectors to heat, there's a bit of an expense there, which we shortchange by just running a generator and powering it, and your guests are happy with hot water. Look at your kitchen. There is very few vendors or suppliers of refrigeration technology that, you know, would give you 0 degrees, minus 18 degrees to keep your, you know, supplies frozen. Solar would, you know, start to work 10 in the morning, 3, 4 in the afternoon. The sun is out. You're beginning to run on batteries. Midnight, you hear a warning, and you ask yourself, is this how I want to keep my meat or fish and these things? You end up going back to this diesel power. To power a microwave, because you want to instantly warm something, the solar PV solution that is going to give you 2 kilowatts of power upfront is certainly expensive. So you find we are caught in this cycle where we wonder whether we should be green or we should just satisfy the customer. Thank you.
I've just got a quick question for Vivian. I don't think this is on, or is it? So when does the ministry expect to implement an ecotourism policy, and how will you sensitize the local tour operators, and how will you enforce it?
Thank you. I think my concern is about related to education, changing the community practice and behavior. And I think it was touched upon by Mr. Kawere in the beginning, but I'm wondering to what extent. Because when I was growing up, we had dustbins and waste paper baskets in our classrooms. We don't have that anymore. But it's difficult for me to throw something outside because of that. So I was wondering to what extent these 3 gentlemen have pushed to see that the curriculum at primary level, nursery level, that we have that behavior, the environmentally friendly practice, inputted into those children, because that's what's going to make a difference for the future.
Thank you. We have a resource in the names of our panelists, but all of us here. This conversation does not end here. We all know that, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more to follow up on. A few last responses and last remarks from each of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we all have the desire to serve clients, but the clients' needs are changing every other time. I remember Budonge College, we had eco toilets. And we thought it was a good marketing. At one point, yes, it was. Until clients said, no, yes, we want an eco environment, but we also want a flush toilet, you know? And so it changed. We had to change. People are demanding more comfort and better stuff. But that said, when it comes to energy, just same sentiments. Budongo, for example, use solar and backed up by a generator. But the truth is that suppliers have been very few. People that a guy comes, you pay $20,000 for a system, and just works for a year or two. Then you have batteries are gone. This is gone. They're trying to ask you for another extra $20,000. You know, and you keep thinking, okay, am I working for you? Am I doing business? So I think when we like to speak more to a person like you and get to understand. But you know, providers, we have to see from your product. Have you served any lodge that we can probably work with? Yeah.